Football Manager 2024 has been out for 2 months already, and at this point in the cycle of any new FM game, it becomes clear to us that there are many changes under the bonnet that slightly alter the way it should be played. Now, we're not talking about major feature announcements, for which FM24 seems to be one of the biggest leaps forward in recent instalments in the franchise, but instead we're talking about those little game engine and match engine enhancements that make the game more realistic, more unpredictable, and perhaps most importantly, more exploitable. In today's video then, we're going to step through our top 5 subtle changes between FM23 and FM24, giving you at least one tip for every one of our learnings so far. Everything is timestamped and titled, so feel free to skip ahead, and please do drop me a like if you find this sort of video helpful. Let's go. Learning number 1 then is that 2-0 is no longer the most dangerous scoreline. It's now 3-0. Now, I don't think that the evolution of Football Manager's match engine includes such a simple line of code as if score equals 3-0, then losing team starts playing better. I mean, we're not talking about FIFA, are we? But what I would say is that complacency plays a much more significant role in this year's match engine, and I cannot count how many matches in our 200 hours of gameplay achieved so far we've either been on the receiving end of a fight back from this scoreline or been able to capitalise on our opponent's sloppy defending once they've gone 3-0 up. Now, how you can take advantage of this information? Well, I would recommend a few things, both on the pitch and off of it. On the pitch then, make use of the complacency-focused half-time team talk instructions if you are in a privileged position after 45 minutes. Be sure to also use the focus and target your defensive-minded players with touchline shouts, and when you've scored that third goal, do whatever you can to adjust your playing style to be slightly more possession-oriented without scuppering tactical familiarity. Off the pitch, well, this one is playing the long game, but there are attributes your defensive players in particular ought to possess in order to combat complacency. These are things like concentration, teamwork, and work rate. If you can slowly evolve those attributes in your defensive mids and centre-backs over time, you'll find that this issue will be phased out organically, and you can relax a little bit more when that third goal goes in for your team. Learning number 2 then is that there's now far more depth to the squad happiness feature in FM24's game engine. Whereas in previous versions of Football Manager, we've seen players' unhappiness revolve around things like playing time, new contracts, and ultimately broken promises, now we have far more active levers in this happiness matrix. We've seen a lot more dissatisfied squad members complaining about training this year, as well as team talks which would fall under management, and the big one this year that can cause a seismic impact on your whole squad's morale is their perception of squad depth. We had an issue with our club captain and most influential player at Guadalajara in our first FM24 save, and they came to us with a complaint about the depth at left wing forward position. We signed another player, as was always our plan in this position, but the calibre of that player we captured wasn't good enough to persuade our squad that we'd taken action on their concern. Then we had an entire season, or 31 of 34 games to be precise, with rotten club morale, all because we didn't know how good a player we had to sign to satisfy that depth. The answer, I think now, is that you need 2 times 2.5 star or more current ability for any given position in order for the squad to feel like there's depth there. So how can you take advantage of this lesson? Well, the fact remains it's always good to check in on this tab, the Dynamics tab, every once in a while, probably at least once a month. And you can actually set reminders in your own FM calendar. If you head to Schedule, Reminders, and then use this drop down arrow on any given date and adjust things accordingly. I mean, this is basically Microsoft Outlook Simulator 2024 at this point, but yeah, having this will at least prompt you to check in on the Dynamics tab every so often. And if you spot training unhappiness, for example, then either up the training intensity for that unsatisfied player or stop the additional training focus for that player. The advice essentially here is to take action before slight unhappiness becomes full-on discontent. Learning number 3 then, and if you don't know this one already, then where have you been? Injuries are plentiful in Football Manager 2024, and we're not just seeing bruised chins every other day either. People are getting properly injured fairly frequently, and in some cases, and we've already witnessed 3, players are retiring because of their unlikeliness to recover from serious injury. But the bad news doesn't stop there. What's new with FM24 is that goalies are getting injured a lot more often now too. We've been absolutely crocked on many occasions and have resorted to playing youth team goalies in big games more than once. The heck of it is that there's nothing much you can do to mitigate this. We suspect that sensible fatigue management, including not going high press all of the time, might play a small role in improving your players' availability and longevity, but we've not really had time to test this yet, and there's nothing much you can do about a broken wrist. So, to take advantage of this information, be sure that you have at least 2 top quality goalkeepers and an additional backup in your squad. I'll be honest here, and I've always resorted with just having that one in reserve in previous FMs, but it's probably best to pay attention to the injury susceptibility in your scouting reports too, and avoid filling your rosters with glass ankles. I'm sorry that this is all I can recommend at this stage. If you have any tips for mitigating injuries in FM24, pop them down in the comments and we may feature them in a future tips video. Learning number 4 then is that natural fitness is such a misleading attribute name. You would think that it means the rate at which players can recover from fatigue, or how consistent their physical attributes might stay throughout their careers, but it apparently doesn't mean either of these things. At this point, we're actually going to recommend a recent video by a chap whose FM tests are absolutely gold standard. If you haven't discovered evidence-based football manager yet, then we've linked a video in this video's description to some content recently released covering the impact of player fatigue on team performances in Football Manager. The lesson here is that you can get so much better at this game and remain consistently entertained by following the right FM creators. Last but by no means least then, lesson number 5 is about a game-changing discovery that came to us during our first few seasons in FM24, and that is that the heading attribute is not actually essential for scoring a shit ton of headers, as exampled by Diego Morcillo, a very young and seriously non-determined striker that starts in the lower leagues of Spain with Guadalajara. He's not particularly strong, his positioning and off the ball isn't exactly inspiring, and his bravery and aggression leaves a lot to be desired. However, in spite of all of this and the fact that his heading attribute is only 9, Morcillo stuck them in with his bonts for fun in seasons 1 and 3 for us, netting 17 headers in 66 games. But it hasn't just been him that we've seen leading with their heads in FM24, and there is a good reason to believe that one particular attribute has become seriously overpowered given a few match engine changes that have meant the ball moves ever so slightly differently. Now, maybe you're not whipping crosses in like me, maybe you've got a pacey advanced forward that is a little lower to the ground than my strikers have been, but for me, this has been one of the most common ways to score in the game so far. This looping cross that sees a tall target man awkwardly leap but head down into the ground at the back post and into the net. My advice here then is to not overlook height, but more importantly, jumping reach as an important attribute for at least one of your forwards. Playing for set pieces, back post corners, and looping crosses, as well as overlapping wingbacks with decent crossing attributes, make for so many more goal opportunities in this game if you've got a proper target in the box. A few honourable mentions in terms of our learnings then. One of them is that we suspect there is an actual difference in the tablets that you have on the touchline depending on what club you're playing for. If you're at a rich club, we think that there's actually more information that can be visualised on these handsets. It's not something we've ever picked up on in previous FMs, and we're not 100% sure it's new to FM24, but the additional information you can squeeze into a club with a rich background means that you can have not just the 2 visualisations that you typically want, but also a very handy new view on how your team is passing. And it's this view that we would recommend keeping up at all times in between highlights. Another honourable mention that we'd like to throw in before we close this video is that, in a similar sense to the discovery of jumping reach playing a bigger part in goal scoring this year, there seems to also be more onus on long shots going in and more ways to score from outside the box. So if you can get hold of centre mids and defensive mids who have long shots 14, you're going to see some screamers. That's going to wrap it for today's video though, folk. We hope that you've learned something new and that this has helped you in your quest for success in FM24. Next up, we'll be revisiting one of our most popular videos to date and talking through the top attributes by position for every role in Football Manager. So be sure to hit that subscribe button if you want to see that. And until next time, my friends, adios.